Hi, everyone. I want to go over with you Module 2 and your options for the journal. So Module 2, we are transitioning now from visual culture into the written and oral forms of communication. These are typically the more familiar forms of communicating that we use every day, right, through speaking and conversation, and through text, through email, and through writing. So these forms of communication are just like our visual forms. So we can read it for context, we can deduce things through coded clues, and the idea behind it is to understand how we express creativity through the written form. So just like our last module, we'll be using the T matrix. So we'll be describing, analyzing, interpreting, and judging. So we'll be looking at the written and oral forms of communicating ideas through story, through narrative, through poetry, through speech. And then we'll be comparing that and explaining that through the artist's tools used to explain and express themselves. We'll interpret the meanings, and lastly, we'll judge whether or not it was successful. So we're going to start with poetry. Poetry is this really interesting form to help communicate ideas about emotion, about themes, about big ideas that impact the world around us. And just like we did a painting or a sculpture or a piece of architecture, we're looking at what is on the page and what does it mean, okay? Now, instead of when you describe looking at the page, you're like, okay, I see white paper with black text. We're describing the form that the narrative takes, right? So that would be the things like the patterns, the rhythm, the repetition, and alliteration, right? So in poetry, this is a great place to start talking about form because it is a structured form, right? It's a form that has some pattern to it, oftentimes rhyming patterns, certainly cadence. There's a natural rhythm to the way the stanzas are organized. Ideas typically repeat. And oftentimes the word choices are meant to evoke certain kinds of emotions and feelings. So one of my favorite poems is Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. And it's this really powerful poem and certainly very poignant for today's culture. So I will link in this video the full text to Still I Rise, and I'll also link Maya Angelou herself delivering the poem, because poetry is meant to be delivered in an oral format, not just written format. And listening to her speak has a lot of movement and power as well. But when you go through, you're going to look through the stanzas, try to figure out what the form is, right? So what is the patterns and repetition that she's using? Then you're going to analyze. You're going to be looking at what are the choices the artist made. So what did she determine was important, right? So she's writing this poem, and I'll give you some context for it. It's definitely linked to the civil rights movement. It's linked to oppression and racism in American Day. So she's using very deliberate language to help communicate those ideas. So what you want to do is you want to go through and you want to look at what are these choices that Maya Angelou made to make her poem so powerful. Then you're going to interpret it. So what does it mean? What is its purpose? Consider the artist's contextual background, consider personal life, time and place, social factors, cultural factors. So who is Maya Angelou, right? So she is this activist in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And she is a product of those time periods, right? Of segregation, of Jim Crow, of the oppression of Black and African American peoples, right? So she's writing in these really powerful ways to say that she won't be silenced. And so that is certainly a way to interpret what she's writing when she says, Still I Rise. Still I Rise certainly has a lot of connection to Black and African American peoples rising during the civil rights movement. So consider it as you're reading this. And lastly, judge the work for successful communication. Does it communicate these ideas to you in a meaningful way? So when you read through this poem, does this poem say the things that you expect it to say? Does it talk to you in the ways that make it more understandable for you? And do you enjoy it? Do you walk away feeling moved by the artwork? All right, so that would be choice number one, right? So filling out that T matrix and then writing a journal reflection based on your outline of describing, analyzing, interpreting, and judging, Still I Rise. The second poem I want to share with you is Pioneers of Pioneers by Walt Whitman. It's a very different poem from a very, very different time period, and Walt Whitman is a very different poet compared to Maya Angelou. But we do go through the same kind of format, right? We're going to look through and look at its form. we're going to look at the choices he made, interpret it based on his context, and then also determine whether or not it's successful. Just like Maya Angelou, Walt Whitman actually recorded this. It's actually one of the first recordings we have. He recorded reading this, so I will link that as well in this video, as well as the full text. This is a much lengthier poem, so the form is a much longer format, but it has a different kind of cadence to it, a different kind of rhythm to it. You'll notice that he uses repetition over and over and over again, and that's meant to kind of emphasize his points. When you're analyzing it, consider the choices he makes. So Whitman is known for his beautiful language, just his really great ways of using adjectives and adverbs, and to describe just like the poetry of his language. Right? Like, it's really powerful the way he communicates in those ways. So look for that composition and what he's emphasizing, because that is meant to be part of his message. It's a very triumphant poem, and so when you're listening to it or reading it, you're meant to walk away with this very victorious kind of way of thinking about things. His meaning, his purpose, right? Now, his background is that this is Civil War and post-Civil War America. This is a time period of great civil unrest, but also of coming together. Whitman wants to link back to a deeper kind of root of what it means to be an American. Obviously, having some kind of unifying message behind it, specifically this idea that we're all Americans, and what Americans are this pioneering spirit. So it doesn't matter if you're south, north, or west. We all come together in this wild frontier land, and that's what he's celebrating, right? So these are parts of his message, and as you read through it, you see that it's really a celebratory hymn of what it means to be an American. So then lastly, what you want to do is judge the success, right? So as you go through it, do you come across, do you come away feeling proud? Do you feel that pride of an adventuring, pioneering country? Okay. All right, so these are two options that you have for the journal. Like I said, I will link both the full texts and the artists reading their texts in the YouTube comments. Feel free to take a look at them. These are just two that you could choose from. There'll be more options to come. And as always, thanks for watching. If you've got questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks, everybody.